Hi Minerva makers, my name is Melanie and welcome back to another Minerva sew-along. Today we'll be learning how to make Simplicity 8743 in a gorgeous and shiny satin. This pleated skirt is a great project for beginners who are learning to sew patterns. It's an elegant and classic design with flattering pleats, hidden pockets and a simple waistband. We'll be learning all of the sewing techniques that you'll need to make this skirt, including how to transfer and make the pleats, sewing the skirt in pockets, and sewing the zipper and making the waistband. Simplicity 8743 is highly reusable and you'll be able to use it to make skirts for all occasions and seasons. I hope you'll give this pattern a try and let's get started. Today I'll be sewing Simplicity 8743 in view B. I'm making this skirt slightly shorter at a T length so that it's suitable for the day. This skirt is an elegant pleated skirt that you can choose a variety of lengths. It comes with either a curved or straight waistband with a sash. It also has the option of a slip. This pattern comes in size 6 to 22. Choose the size based on your waist measurement only, as the skirt is free. Your waist measurement is the slimmest part of your middle. I'm using a size 14 for this skirt. Size up if you're unsure as the waistband is very fitted. The back of the pattern you'll find the suggested fabric, body measurements for each size, fabric quantity and finished garment lengths. The fabric I'm using today is a beautiful pale blue satin. It's shiny and creates gorgeous crisp pleats. It's the perfect type of fabric for this skirt. Minerva stocks this fabric in a variety of colors to suit all occasions and styles. You'll need up to 5.2 meters of fabric depending on which view of skirt you choose. This satin is synthetic, so you'll need to iron this on the synthetic setting and no higher. You'll need to pre-wash the fabric the same way that you plan to wash the skirt. To stiffen the waistband, you'll need some interfacing. You'll need 1.2 meters of light fusible interfacing. I'm using Vilene interfacing. You can find a link for the fabric, interfacing and pattern in the description so you can steal this look for yourself. The haberdashery that you'll need today include your sewing machine, a matching polyester thread and a bobbin to wind it on, fabric shears, paper scissors, sellotape, a highlighter, pins, sewing needles, a quick unpick, tailor's chalk or erasable fabric marker. You'll need a matching 18 cm zipper, and you'll also need a pair of hook and eyes. To sew satin, you need sharp or microtext machine needles in size 70. I'm using an overlocker to finish all the raw edges with matching thread. This pattern has multiple lines to represent each of the sizes. Take a highlighter or marker and trace around the line that represents your size. This will make it easier to cut. Cut around the outside of the pattern following the line for your size. I'll be cutting out pieces 1, 2, 5 and 6. Note that for piece 1 you also need to attach the extension called piece 1A. Cut out both of these pieces in your size. Both of these pieces have circle markings with a cross in the middle. This is the match point. Place piece 1A on top of piece 1 and match them up. Use some tape to stick these pieces together and treat them as piece 1 from now on. You'll see that there's multiple cutting lines for piece 1. I'll be using the cutting length for view B, but to preserve the pattern, I suggest cutting out the longest cutting length for your size. When it comes to cutting out the pieces, you can simply fold the piece up along the cutting line you want. We can now go ahead and cut out our beautiful fabric. On the instructions of this pattern, you'll find the cutting layouts. Choose your cutting layout based on the width of your fabric and the design of the skirt that you want to make to help minimize fabric wastage. When the piece on the layout is shaded, it needs to be placed upside down. I'm making view B with a shorter skirt, so I'll be following this cutting layout. I'm going to start by folding the fabric in half with the selvages together. I'm then going to place piece 6 on top of the fabric. All pieces for this skirt have a grain line arrow. This arrow must be parallel with the selvage so that the piece will be cut on the grain and will drape properly. Use your tape measure to make sure that the length between the arrow and the selvage, or in this case the fold, is the same at both ends of the arrow. Pin the entire piece in place. Place piece 5 next to 6 and make sure that the grain line arrow is parallel to the fold. Pin in place. Place piece 2 on the fabric and match this piece up to the grain line arrow with the fold. Grab your shears, cut around the outside of the pattern pieces that you've pinned so far. The triangle markings on the outside of the pattern pieces are called notches and are essential to help us line up the pieces. I'm going to carefully cut a small triangle into the piece to mark the notches. We need to cut piece 2 again, so I'm going to place this piece next to the other selvage on the other side and pin and cut it out again. Now that's done, I'm going to unpin the fabric. I'm going to fold the fabric in half lengthwise this time. Place piece 1 on top of the fabric. Align the grain line with the selvage and pin the entire piece. If you're using a shorter skirt length, this is where you need to fold up the pattern up to the cutting line that you want. Cut this piece out. Move down the fabric and cut this piece again. Grab your interfacing. For this skirt, we only need to cut out piece 5 in the interfacing. Place the shiny side of the interfacing with the glue on top on the table facing up. Place piece 5 on top. Align the grain line of this piece with the selvage and pin. Cut this piece out in the interfacing. Now we're all done cutting out the fabric. We'll go ahead and prepare the pieces to sew. Before you start sewing, I recommend transferring all the circle markings to help you match up the pieces. For each of these pieces, I have 2 copies right sides together and I'll be transferring the marking on the wrong side of the fabric. Grab piece 1. On the side seam you'll see 2 circle markings to help leave an opening for the pockets. Place the pattern on top of the fabric. Pin next to the circle marking that you need to transfer. Push a pin down through the center of the marking. Carefully pull back the pattern. Use some tailor's chalk to make a marking at the base of the pin. Flip the pattern over and make a marking on the other side as well. You need to repeat this for the other 2 copies of piece 1 as well. Transfer the circle markings onto piece 2, which is the pocket piece. The last piece that has markings that we need to transfer is piece 5, the waistband piece. I would recommend doing this after you interface one of the pieces. Transfer the circle marking on the left side of the center of the waistband. These markings are used to help align the skirt with the waistband when it's sewn. You'll see that there are 2 lines on the waistband to mark the center front and back. These are important for attaching the skirt. I'm going to pin next to these markings and I'm going to fold over the pattern next to the marking. Make a line with your ruler next to the fold of the fabric. Grab piece 1 again. This time I'm going to lay the pattern on top of the right side of the fabric of just 1 copy. Pin next to each of the pleat markings. You'll see that the pleat markings have a solid line or a broken line. The solid line is folded and placed on top of the broken line when we pleat. To help distinguish these markings, I like to use 2 different colors of tailor's chalk. The first marking is a solid line, so I'm going to fold back the pattern next to the pleat line. I'm using a red piece of tailor's chalk and I'm going to make a line next to the fold. Grab the pin so you can fold back the next pleat. Once you're done, you can go ahead and make an arrow marking to help you see which direction the pleats need to be folded based on the pattern piece. Repeat this process for all of the pleat markings on all 4 of the skirt pieces. Next, I'm going to stay stitch the top of the skirt. Stay stitching should be sewn from the side towards the back or the front seam to help prevent distorting the fabric as you sew. The back seam has a double notch. Sew on top of the raw edge with a 1.3 centimeter seam allowance. Lastly, we'll interface the skirt. Place one of the waistband pieces on the ironing board with the wrong side facing up. Place the glue side of the interfacing down on the fabric. Press your iron on top of the interfacing until it fuses to the fabric. Alright, we're ready to sew the skirt. For the first seam of the skirt, we need to make the center front and back seam. Grab a copy of piece 1. Place this piece on the table with the right side facing up. Place the other copy of piece 1 on top with the right sides together. Line up the double notch for the center back or front seam. Pin the entire seam. Sew this seam together at 1.5 cm seam allowance. Repeat for the other 2 copies of piece 1. Now we can go ahead and make the pleats. Bring the skirt up to the ironing board. The solid line of my pleats is the red marking, and this is where you need to fold the fabric. Fold the skirt wrong sides together on top of this marking. Press with your iron. Do this for all of the solid pleats. Lay out the skirt on top of the ironing board. Grab one of the folds that you just made and place it on top of the broken line pleat marking. In my case, this is white markings. Follow the direction of the arrow marking. Place the fold so that the top edge creates a smooth line. Use your iron to press the pleat and pin into place. Do this for all of the pleats of the skirt. Back of your sewing machine, change the stitch length to the maximum on the straight stitch. If you have a contrasting thread color, then I recommend using this. Now we're going to sew on top of the fold of the pleat from the top edge down to around 5 centimeters. This is called basting. It's a temporary seam to help hold the pleats in place as we work on the skirt. Do this for all the pleats. Baste the top edge of the skirt with a 1 cm seam allowance to hold the pleats into place. Grab the pocket pieces, which is piece 2. Firstly, we're going to sew the right pocket. Grab one of the pocket pieces and place it on top of the right hand corner of the skirt, matching the notch. Pin into place. Grab the other half of the skirt. For this one, we're going to pin the pocket piece to the top left-hand corner of the skirt with right sides together and pin into place. Sew on top of the pocket with a 1 cm seam allowance. Bring the skirt up to the ironing board. Use your iron to press the center back and front seams of the skirt split. Press the pocket piece away from the skirt. Finish the raw edges of all the seams that you've made so far. Now I'm going to understitch the pocket pieces to help them stay on the inside of the skirt. The seam allowance for the pockets should be facing towards the pocket side of the seam. Pin into place. With your sewing machine, sew at 0.5 cm seam allowance from the seam on the pocket side. Do this for both pockets. Place one of the skirt pieces on the table with the right side facing up. Grab the other skirt piece and place it on top so that the right sides are together. The pockets should be facing outwards. For this next seam, we're going to sew the side seam of the skirt, but we need to leave an opening for the pocket, which is represented by the 2 circle markings on top of the side seam. Pin the skirt side seam together. Sew from the top of the skirt down to the circle marking. Restart sewing on the other circle marking and sew down to the hem. Now we can line up the 2 pocket pieces and pin them right sides together. Start sewing at the top corner of the pocket. Sew around the curve by making a few stitches, then push the needle into the fabric, lift the foot and readjust the direction. Sew Sew up to the side seam for the skirt but not through it. Finish the curved edge of the pocket. The pocket needs to face towards the left side of the skirt, so I'm going to snip into the right seam allowance below the pocket. This lets the pocket face the way that it needs to without creating twisted seams. With your iron, press the pocket towards the left side. Sew on top of the top edge of the pocket and the skirt with a 1 cm seam allowance. Next we'll be working on the left pocket, which is a little more complicated as it will be sitting beside the zipper. On the top right hand corner of the skirt, place a pocket piece so that the right sides are together. Pin into place. For this pocket, we're going to sew between the 2 circle markings. Do this at a 1.5 cm seam allowance. Now at each of these circle markings, I'm going to sew it at just a few stitches back and forth at 1.3 cm seam allowance. This is important to help reinforce the seam so it won't tear later. Grab your scissors and cut a slit into the seam allowance up to the reinforcing seam at the circle marking. You can go ahead and finish the seam just between the circle markings. Take the skirt up to the ironing board. Press the pocket piece outwards from the skirt. Pin the seam allowance towards the pocket side. Just like with the previous pocket, you can understitch the seam allowance towards the pocket side of the seam that you just made. Sew at 0.5 cm seam allowance. Take the last pocket piece and place it on top of the piece that you just sewed. Pin together at the curved edge of the pocket. Sew these pieces together at 1.5 cm seam allowance. Be careful not to catch the skirt in this seam. Finish the raw edge of the curve of the pocket. You can go ahead and iron the pocket under the wrong side of the skirt. Pin the bottom of the pocket to the skirt. Sew at 1 cm seam allowance to hold it in place. Now you can go ahead and finish the side seam raw edges including the pocket. Pin the top edge of the pocket to the skirt. Sew on top of the pocket with a 1 cm seam allowance. The pocket is all ready to insert the zipper. Today I'll be making a lapped zipper on the side seam to close the skirt. At the top corners of the skirt, make a marking at 2 cm seam allowance from the top with a ruler and some tailor's chalk. Open the zipper up and place the left side down on the fabric. The zipper head needs to be facing down. Position the stopper of the zipper under the marking that you just made at 2 cm. You'll also need to position the teeth of the zipper so that they're 1.5 cm from the raw edge. Pin the entire zipper in place. Take the zipper over to your sewing machine. You'll need to change your foot to a basic zipper foot in the left position. Make sure that your needle is in the center position. We'll be sewing from the top down. Place the teeth of the zipper under the left groove of the foot. Sew down the length of the zipper until you reach the base. Take the skirt over to the ironing board. On the wrong side, fold over the last side seam raw edge by 1.5 cm. Press with your iron. This fold will help create a lapped zipper. Make sure that the skirt isn't twisted. Place a piece of cardboard under the zipper. Working with just the right edge of the skirt, I'm going to place the fold that I just made on top of the zipper and pin. You want to put the fold to be pressed right up against the previous seam of the zipper and make a smooth line at the top raw edge. Pin into place so that you catch the zipper tape on the other side. The pins need to be far enough from the zipper so you can still undo the head. The pleat on the right side of the zipper is in the way for the next part, so I'm going to carefully undo the basting. Change your stitch length to the maximum on the straight stitch and use a contrasting colour. Sew on the right hand side of the undone zipper. We're doing this to base the zipper to get the position perfect. Aside from the head, the zipper should be completely covered by the overlapped fabric. I'm going to make a marking with some tailor's chalk at the end of the zipper. Pull down the head of the zipper for about 5 centimeters. Now we'll go ahead and make the final seam. Make sure that you're using a matching colour and normal stitch length. Bring the zipper onto the left groove of the foot. Start sewing from the top of the zipper. Once you've sewn down about 5 centimeters, push the needle into the fabric. Lift the foot as high as possible and zip up the zipper. Put the foot down and keep sewing to the end of the zipper. Push the needle into the fabric. Lift and turn the foot so that it's facing towards the zipper. Carefully sew on top of the zipper to the other seam. Unpick the basting on the zipper. At this point, you can go ahead and place the pleat marking on top of the zipper. I'm placing the fold of the pleat on top of the zipper so that it will cover it nicely. Change your sewing machine foot back to normal. I'm going to base the pleat in place with a 1 cm seam allowance. Place the skirt the wrong side out on top of the table. The rest of the side seam below the zipper needs to be sewn. Bring the raw edges together and pin. Sew from just below the zipper down to the hem with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. And the zipper is all done. It's beautifully hidden by the pleat and it has a pocket on the side. Now we'll go ahead and sew in the waistband. Now we're ready to sew the waistband onto the skirt. The waistband is made from piece 7. Grab the copy of this that you've interfaced. We'll be using the markings that we previously transferred to help arrange the waistband on the skirt. On the left side of the waistband, mark out 1.5 cm from the short edge with some tailor's chalk. Make this marking on the wrong side. Place the skirt on the table with the right side facing up. The waistband needs to be placed on top with the right sides together. This marking represents the seam allowance for the end of the waistband. Place the end with the line that you just made directly on top of the left edge of the skirt and pin. You need to place the circle marking on the other end of the waistband directly on top of the other right end of the skirt. Start pinning the waistband to the skirt. Be careful to match the notches. Pin the entire waistband. Sew on top of the skirt with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. Grab your scissors. We want to trim off about half of the seam allowance, but we want to leave the ends of the waistband intact, so I'm going to cut a slit into the waistband next to the skirt, then trim off the seam allowance. Unpick the basting on the pleats. For the top raw edge of the skirt, we need to fold it over by 1.5 cm on the wrong side and press with your iron. Place the remaining waistband piece right sides together on the top raw edge. This will be the edge without the notches. Pin these pieces together. Sew together with a 1 cm seam allowance. Take the skirt over to the ironing board. Both of the seams on the waistband need to be ironed upwards. Finish the raw edge of the seam that you just made. Finish the top raw edge as well. On the top raw edge, you'll be understitching the facing side of the waistband, which is the waistband piece which isn't attached to the skirt. Pin the seam towards this side. Sew with a 5mm seam allowance from the seam on the facing side. Take the facing side of the waistband and fold it over the top of the other waistband piece. Pin these pieces together at the raw edges. For the short end, we'll be sewing the skirt seam towards the fold. On the other side, I'm going to sew from the fold towards the corner and then turn and stop close to the skirt seam. Sew both seams at 1.5cm seam allowance. When you reach the corner, push the needle into the fabric, lift the foot, then turn it towards the skirt. Sew the corners again at 1.3cm seam allowance. This is the reinforcing seam and helps prevent the corners from popping later. Use your scissors to cut off all the excess seam allowance around the corners. Finish the raw edges. You can go ahead and push the waistband to the right side out. Give it an iron. The last opening of the waistband needs to be pinned onto the skirt seam allowance. Pin just above the waistband seam. This opening needs to be hand sewn with a slip stitch. Thread a needle with a double strand of thread and knot at the end. Push the needle into the skirt seam allowance at the corner so it will be hidden. Pull the needle through. Run the needle through the fold of the waistband for about 0.5 centimeter. The needle must enter the fabric opposite to the base of the thread. Pull the needle through. Make the next stitch into the seam allowance of the skirt. Push the needle into the seam allowance opposite where the last stitch ended for about 0.5 centimeter above the seam. Check the right side of the skirt to make sure you can't see the needle. Then pull through. Keep repeating this pattern of stitches for the length of the opening. Here's how to make the knot. Make a small stitch and pull it down to a loop. Pass the needle through the loop 3 times. Pull the needle and the knot will form at the base. Repeat once, then cut off the thread. And the waistband is all done. Before you hem the skirt, I would recommend leveling it to create a perfect straight hem. Hang the garment for at least 24 hours on a coat hanger or on your dress form. Over time, the bias or diagonal of the fabric will stretch and distort your nice level hem. By hanging it up beforehand and leveling the hem, we can prevent this. Next, we'll measure an even hem. For the best results, hang the skirt on a dress form. Make sure that the waistband is straight. Adjust the hem gauge to the height of the shortest raw edge of the skirt. Generally, this will be the centre back seam or side seam. My hem gauge has a notch in the middle, so I'm going to adjust the height so that the raw edge runs through this notch. Now we can start measuring the hem. Turn the dress form so that the skirt runs through the hem gauge. If the raw edge falls below the notch, then place a pin at the notch. The pin represents where the new raw edge needs to be cut. Try to place the pin at least every 5 centimeters. Keep doing this all the way around the skirt. Once you're done, you'll have a nice line of pins to show where you need to cut. Lay the fabric on the table. Carefully cut a line following the pins. Finish the raw edge. At your sewing machine, change your thread to a contrasting colour for both the top and bobbin. Change your stitch length to the maximum on the straight stitch. Pull out some of the thread from the machine before and after you sew, and do not backstitch. We need to sew an easing stitch near the raw edge. The easing stitch will help gather in the excess fabric at the raw edge and prevent tucks on the right side of the skirt. Sew the easing stitch at 1 centimeter seam allowance for each section of the skirt. Gently pull the thread as you hold the fabric. The fabric will start to gather underneath your fingers. Spread out the gather over the whole length of the skirt. We're aiming to make the finished edge slightly wavy but not properly gathered. At your ironing board, fold up the raw edge of the skirt by 3.2 centimeters on the wrong side. Press the fold with your iron. Pin the hem into place. Sew on top of the hem with a 2.5 centimeter seam allowance. Once they're done, you can go ahead and unpick all the easing stitches. We need to use a fastener to close the waistband. I'll be using 2 pairs of hooks and eyes to do this. For this waistband, the short side is placed over the top of the long side. Grab a ruler and some tailor's chalk. Take the wrong side of the short end of the waistband. Measure 1.5 centimeters from the top and bottom of the waistband and make a horizontal line. Measure 1 centimeter from the end of the waistband. Use a ruler to draw this line of tailor's chalk. Grab 2 hooks and place their ends at the intersection between the lines that you just drew. Thread your needle and make a knot. I'm going to make a small stitch under the loop. The needle needs to pierce just 1 layer of fabric, so check that you can't see the needle from the right side. Pull the needle through the loop. Keep making this small stitch until you've built a secure amount of thread on the loop. Repeat this for all the loops on the hooks. Knot off. Moving on to sewing the eyes. These are sewn onto the right side of the long end of the waistband. Make a marking in line with the zipper on the waistband. On the left side of this line, make a parallel line at 0.5 centimeter. Make horizontal lines at 1.5 centimeters from the top and bottom of the waistband. The eye must be placed at the intersection of the vertical line and each horizontal line. Place the eye towards the end of the waistband. Sew the loops in place. The closures are all done. The hooks and eyes will hold the waistband firm as you wear the skirt. The last thing we need to do is sew the sash, which is made from piece 6. Grab 2 copies and place them right sides together at the seam with the notch and pin. Sew together at 1.5 centimeters seam allowance. Finish the raw edge of this seam. For this next part, we need to leave an opening so we can pull the sash right sides out. Make 2 tailor's chalk markings near the center of one of the long raw edges about 15 centimeters apart. Do not sew between these markings. Fold the sash in half lengthwise and pin the raw edges together. Start sewing from the fold. Turn the corner and continue sewing to the tailor's chalk. Finish sewing at the marking, then restart on the other. Sew the entire sash. Sew the corners of the sash again at 1.3 centimeter seam allowance to reinforce them. Cut off about half of the seam allowance and trim off all the seam allowance at the corners. Finish the raw edge of this seam. To bring the sash the right side out, you need to use a blunt, slim object like a pencil or knitting needles. Stack the end of the sash on top of this until you reach the opening. Press the sash with your iron. You'll need to fold the raw edge of the opening inside of the sash so it can't be seen and make an even edge. Pin into place. Slip stitch the opening of the sash just like with the waistband. Now the skirt is all done. I love the volume that the pleats create and how shiny and beautiful the satin is. This is a classic skirt design suitable for day or evening, depending on the length and the fabric that you use. Thanks for joining me in this Minerva sew-along for a beautiful pleated skirt made from satin. I hope you'll give this pattern a try for yourself. I'd love to see how you interpret it. This design is classic and suitable for all occasions, so it's great for filling out gaps in your wardrobe. Leave a comment below, we'll be sure to read it. Please follow Minerva for more projects, ideas, and tutorials. Thanks for watching!